Okay. Now, I'm going to step in here.
Matt, could I just counter for once? I'll be very short.
Sure.
I'll be very short. I think,
Well, actually, Ted, let me, what I was going to say is, as I mentioned earlier, you've got note cards on your chairs. If you have questions for the panelists, write down your questions and pass the cards to your left. And my colleague, Madeline Dubeck, over here will come by and collect them, and she'll select some for our panelists. So go ahead, Ted.
Yes, one of the things that I wanted to point out is that the tax structure today is already extremely progressive, extremely. The top 1%, Ben, remind me, what does the top 1% of the population pay in taxes? It's around 37%. It's a massive number. The top 10% of people pay the lion's share of taxes in the U.S. And the bottom 50% pay very little. So the system is already extremely progressive. And as I mentioned, somebody who makes 100 or 1,000 times more than I do will pay 1,000 times more than I will. And that's already fair. So that's point number one. Number two is that somehow Ralph's analysis is ignoring the fact that we already have lots of bad policies. People are already a little bit tired of what's happening in Illinois, politically, corruption, lack of economic growth. Illinois has the second highest unemployment rate in the nation. And so Ralph's solution for that is more taxes. That just doesn't make sense. Corporations having more taxes, people having more taxes, and that's going to create more prosperity in Illinois. It's the exact opposite. So I think I'd be very cautious about it, regardless of what his math and analysis says. A state that's having the problems that it has can't afford more taxes. What it needs is lower taxes, a more competitive state, and a place where businesses and people want to come to that helps generate more tax because of vibrancy.
Okay. Madeline, do you have a question ready, or I have more I can fire off from here?
I can even respond to that. So as we're waiting.
Well, I did want to ask one thing. I'll ask one more question. Ralph, on the progressive tax, one characteristic of a progressive tax system is that during an economic boom, the state can really boom. During an economic downfall, you hit it harder. And one of the things that supporters of a flat tax say is that it's more level. In a recession, you don't go down as much. In good times, you don't go up as much. We've seen that Illinois government, Illinois politicians, they love to spend. And as we saw during the 2000s, they like to spend even if they have to borrow the money and spend it. If we implement a progressive system and we go into an economic surge and there's all kinds of new money, how do you ensure that the state is ready for when another 9/11 happens, or something similar, or when another 2008 happens?
I'm really not concerned about that, and I'll tell you why. The state's tax policy has historically been so conservative, and the structure even that we put out is so conservative that it wouldn't result in this massive influx of revenue that the state wouldn't know what to do with. I think that if, in fact, when you're looking at our precarious fiscal position, and yes, the temporary tax increase did stabilize things. We had a deficit of approaching $16 billion when that tax increase passed. It has since the tax increase stabilized between $8.5 and $9.2 billion in every year. If we didn't have that tax increase, today the deficit in Illinois would be greater than the amount we spend on all services. So it did play a role, and that just shows you sort of how out of whack our tax policy is, number one. A couple of quick things, though, to respond to. There's no, I'm very comfortable with this, there's no independent academic that would look at tax policy in Illinois and call it progressive. We are one of the most regressive taxing states in the nation, and consistently. And that's because your tax burden doesn't just come from your income tax. It's sales taxes and property taxes and excise taxes, and income taxes are a component. So when you look at total tax burden all in, and tax burden has to be measured as a percentage of income. You're looking for burden. You're not looking for taxes paid. It's almost an irrelevant number. So if someone earning $10,000 a year is paying $1,000 in total taxes, that's a pretty high burden. Somebody earning $10 million a year is paying $10,000 in taxes. They don't feel it. So the dollars paid aren't the important part of the comparison and are never utilized to determine tax burden. You look at the burden on the individual's family's living circumstances predicated on their income, and that is how you do a comparison across income classes. So we are very much an unfair taxing state, and one of the ways to fix that historically in tax policy is to go to progressive rate structure for your income tax. So that had to be clarified and put out there, that when you pick up a book on fiscal policy and it talks about tax burden, it will talk about it as a percentage of income. If you go to the Federation of Tax Administrators, which is an independent group that just collects the consolidated audited financial statements of the different states and reports the data, it says the best way to measure tax burden is as a percentage of income all in. It is just sort of taken. So using dollars paid, interesting, we even note in our report that people at the top already pay more in dollars in as a percentage than anyone else. We just don't feel that that is a compelling argument, nor is it one that people that really deal with fiscal policy independently consider.
And Ted, I know that you'll have a response to that. And here's a point that I think both our panelists agree on, that Illinoisans are taxed unfairly. Am I correct? I believe
Yes.
you probably agree with that too, but for different reasons.
Right, so we have slightly different statistics, and Ralph, again, Illinois is a high-tax state, and we published a paper on that. Illinois pays the 9th highest state and local taxes. So if you look at the actual numbers, $4,526 is what Illinoisans pay. If we do that in percentage, as Ralph has said, we are the 11th highest. Again, simple math, published by the Tax Foundation. You can find it on their site. We have the 2nd highest property taxes when measured as a percent of home price. So people already feel they're very high taxed in Illinois across the board. Now, what's scary about more taxation and more tax ideas is that everybody wants to join in on the game. This plan here is a progressive tax at the state level. Karen Lewis in Chicago now wants her own commuter tax and another form of progressive, it's not a progressive tax, but another form of tax. States and municipalities and counties are also in fiscal trouble with their own pension crises. Most of you may know what's happening with the state and police pensions, even in Springfield. And so everybody needs more taxes. And what's happening is that we're ignoring the true problem, is that we have a spending problem and we need reforms. And so if Illinois is already the 9th highest tax state in the country, we don't need to add more taxes. And just the last point I wanted to make is that Ralph speaks about taxes as if people don't actually care about them, or they don't feel them, and that they don't matter. And we beg to differ on that. Individuals care about taxes. They care about what they're paying for, and they care about the services they receive. And in Illinois, I think that a lot of people are paying a lot of money and not getting the services they deserve. And what we need to do is think about reforming those systems, not just throwing more money at the same failed systems.
Okay.
Okay,
Ralph,
so
about 30 seconds, and then we're going to turn it over
So
to
the
the
Tax
audience
Foundation says you can't use their numbers for interstate comparisons on tax burden, and here's why. They pick an individual living in a state, pick a state, Illinois, California, wherever, and they say, based on that person's income, here's how much they pay in state taxes to all states, predicated on the services and goods they consume in commerce. It does not isolate out one state's tax burden to compare it to another. It just shows what a taxpayer in a certain state will pay in all state taxes to all states. Now, interestingly, Illinois has a lot of affluent people buying stuff from New York and California and everywhere else, and pay a lot in state taxes to other states. When you isolate out Illinois only, state and local tax burden as a percentage of income, don't use my math, use the Federation of Tax Administrators, which simply takes the numbers from the consolidated audited financial statements of the states and reports them. Illinois is in the bottom, consistently, 15 total taxing states in the nation, and that includes every tax and every fee charged by any unit of state or local government. We are in an incredibly low taxing state. We remain so even after the temporary tax increase when you isolate out our own state taxes and fees.
Okay.
Just the 1 second rebuttal. The Tax Foundation also has removed the amount of taxes that Ralph is talking about that people pay to other states. And even after that adjustment, we are still the 9th highest.
It's not what they say.
Okay.
That's-
They-
that's
I
what
think we're going to agree to disagree on
They
that
say you
one.
can't use their numbers.
I
for
spoke-
these
Let's go
comparisons.
to some audience questions at that point.